Today was day 13 of the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard defamation trial, and today we got some real fireworks. Let's talk about it. Hey everyone, welcome to Legalbytes. If you're new here, my name is Alita. I'm a lawyer licensed in California and DC, and on this channel, we explain the law one bite at a time. So if you watched yesterday's recap, you might remember that I said that yesterday was basically Johnny's worst day at trial so far. Looking at today, however, Johnny had a much better day, in my opinion. Starting off, we finished Nurse Erin Boerum Falati's video deposition testimony. Then we heard from Michael Spindler, a forensic accountant who testified to Johnny's lost damages in recent years. Following Mr. Spindler, the Depp legal team rested its case in chief, and the Heard legal team took the routine step of requesting to strike Johnny's claims and dismiss the action. And after that attempt, we heard from Amber's first witness, Dr. Don Hughes, a forensic psychologist. Let's start with Nurse Boerum. Picking up from yesterday, we basically ended up getting a lot of what we've already gotten out of the concierge medical staff so far. For example, Nurse Boerum testified from her nursing notes that Amber had become reliant on stimulants, methamphetamines, opiates, and alcohol as a result of her history of being abused early in life. She also testified from her notes that Amber reported feelings of anxiety and jealousy of Johnny's fame and his way of interacting with women, as well as that Amber would cope with that anxiety with impulsive yelling and anger. She also furthermore testified from her notes that on at least one occasion, Amber took mushrooms and MDMA with an unidentified high-profile male at home without Johnny's knowledge. This last one was particularly interesting because it goes towards discrediting the possibility that Johnny could be abusing Amber through unfounded accusations of infidelity. But anyhow, that basically was the gist of Nurse Boerum. It was arguably important to get in, but it is kind of incredible when you think about how drugs and alcohol have basically become so routine in this case that by now they're almost boring. Anyway, then we heard from Michael Spindler. Mr. Spindler is a forensic accountant at B. Riley Advisory Services and testified as an expert witness to Johnny's lost earnings over the last few years. In my opinion, this expert witness completely made up for yesterday's Q-score expert. Everything I was concerned about with that witness from yesterday is just a distant memory, honestly, because Mr. Spindler was the perfect mic drop for Johnny's case in chief and really, in my opinion, stuck the landing quite well. Looking at the accounting records, witness statements, and trial testimony, Mr. Spindler was able to form the opinion that Johnny lost earnings amounting to approximately $40 million between December 2018 and October 1st, 2020. Now, before I get into how this expert witness broke down the $40 million in the damages analysis, it is important, of course, to note that $40 million is less than the $50 million that Johnny has asked for in his complaint. One thing to note is that it is very possible that that extra $10 million could be accounted for potentially in emotional harm. But anyway, Mr. Spindler calculated the $40 million out between $22.5 million and $17.5 million. The $22.5 million of that amount is from his loss in the role of Captain Jack Sparrow in Pirates of the Caribbean 6. Mr. Spindler testified that he got that number primarily from listening to Mr. Wiggum's testimony yesterday about the fact that there was a general agreement between Disney and Johnny Depp for Pirates of the Caribbean 6, and specifically for Johnny to star in that role once again, but that the fact that it was not papered before he was fired and leading after the 2018 Washington op-ed. Mr. Spindler then testified that the $17.5 million was lost from Johnny's non-franchise roles in the form of films, endorsements, and other projects. He said that he reached this number by looking at Johnny's 2017 bookings, which he said showed instances where there was a deal and cash that showed up as a result of the deal. He testified that he looked at 2017 for two main reasons. First, Mr. Wiggum testified that 2017 was a typical working year for Johnny. And second, he said that it was the latest year before the 2018 op-ed that gave a complete picture of what a typical year would look like, since, for example, Johnny had taken a break in 2018 to go and spend some time with his kids. In my opinion, his reasoning was pretty sound, and so I already found him to be a pretty credible witness. But his testimony was made even stronger by the fact that he said that he used Johnny's earnings in 2017 instead of 2016 because 2017 was closer to the time period he was trying to compare for his analysis. The reason I think this strengthens his testimony is because if he had used 2016, the damages calculation actually could have been even higher, since Johnny earned more in 2016 than he did in 2017. So to me, this made him seem even more honest and credible. Okay, so that was Johnny's last witness. After this, the Depp legal team closed their case in chief. Whenever the plaintiff closes his or her case in chief, there is a routine argument that takes place in basically every single trial that happens in the United States. And when I say it's routine, I mean it's arguably malpractice for a defense attorney not to bring this up at this particular point in the trial. And what I'm talking about here is the defendant's motion to dismiss or a motion to strike. Basically, what happens is the defense attorney gets up and argues to the judge that the plaintiff's case should be thrown out because he or she has not met their burden of introducing evidence to meet every element of every claim. Then the plaintiff gets up and shows the judge the various pieces of evidence that they've brought out into evidence that fit into each element. The argument is basically whether it's worth it to put the claims to the jury. If it's impossible because there's not enough evidence on the record to allow any jury to find in favor of the plaintiff, the case can be thrown out. That said, I will say that although, of course, this has happened before, it's exceedingly rare for a defendant to win at this point in time. And here, Mr. Rottenborn of the Heard legal team argued that Johnny's claims as to all three of the op-ed statements at issue should be thrown out. And although Rottenborn actually made some decent arguments, Judge Azcarate quickly noted that the parties had stipulated or agreed to have Amber Heard testify in the defense case in chief. This means that they agreed that Amber would testify only after Johnny's case had rested. Although I already felt pretty comfortable with the likelihood that Judge Azcarate would overrule Rottenborn's motion, once we learned about this stipulation, I knew for a fact that she would deny it. This is because it would be incredibly unfair and unjust for the Heard legal team to agree with the Depp legal team that Amber would not testify under Johnny's case in chief, and then try to use that argument to argue that the Depp legal team shoulda, coulda, woulda brought Amber's testimony earlier. Anyway, in the end, Judge Azcarate did in fact deny the motion as to counts 2 and 3, and she took under advisement the motion as to count number 1. This means that she determined that she didn't have enough information in front of her on the issue of whether the first statement, the online title of the op-ed, should be struck out. When a judge takes a matter under advisement, they basically are putting that argument on hold until more information becomes available and they can make a ruling on it later when that time comes. I do anticipate that Judge Azcarate will overrule the motion as to statement number 1 as well, when the time comes. But anyway, the most exciting part of this exchange came when Ben Chu from the Depp legal team stood up to give his argument in opposition to the motion. Cool, calm, and collected Ben Chu showed us in this exchange that he can really bring the fireworks and emotionality. He testified to how awful Amber's behavior was according to the testimony and how she gravely mistreated Johnny during their relationship and more. It was an amazing sight to see, honestly, and if you haven't seen it, I really recommend you check out a clip of it somewhere. Not only was this a preview of what his closing argument undoubtedly will be like, it seemed like his impassioned speech was not even necessarily targeted at the judge. Specifically, he seemed to be gunning to reach either the media for the PR campaigns of either side, or Amber herself, or maybe both. Seeing the way that she was reacting to it, turning her head vigorously from Mr. Chu to Judge Azcarate, seemingly trying to find some sort of emotional connection with the judge, she seemed really bothered by the things that Mr. Chu was saying. And honestly, this seemed to be a really effective way of getting under her skin, seemingly right before she testifies. Despite that, however, she was not the first to testify as a witness in her case in chief. Instead, we met Dr. Don Hughes, a forensic psychologist. Dr. Hughes testified to all kinds of things while on the witness stand, and there are problems with a lot of the things that she said. As an initial matter, she used a lot of gendered language to indicate a victim and an abuser along gendered lines. At one point, she threw out a caveat for same-sex couples, but she gendered the terms victim and abuser so hard that it was almost impossible not to get the message that she was selling this idea that when talking about heterosexual couples, victims are female and abusers are male. However, aside from that, she did testify to a lot of characteristics of abuse, as well as characteristics of abusers and DV survivors. As an example, she talked about coercive control as a method of abuse. This could be financial, emotional, or otherwise, and basically is a way for the abuser to control something in the environment so that the victim does exactly what the abuser wants to do without any other real choice. She also testified that size and strength matters in a relationship in determining who is the abused and who is the abuser. Furthermore, she said that it's common for abusers to abuse the victim, then profusely apologize so that the victim gets lulled into complacency and falls back into the abusive control of the abuser. Now, that's all well and good, but after hearing from Johnny and his other witnesses over the last few weeks, I couldn't help but think of their testimonies when Dr. Hughes was describing these dynamics. There were so many things that Johnny testified to doing that seemed to fit perfectly with Dr. Hughes' characterizations of DV victims. And there were so many things that we heard about Amber up to now that seemingly fit perfectly into how Dr. Hughes described abusers. So I really anticipate there being some very, very, very fertile ground for Johnny's team to cross-examine Dr. Hughes by lining up everything she said about these characterizations and nailing them to what we've heard already about Johnny and Amber so far. Now, there were a ton of other problems with this testimony as well, to be honest. And before I get into some of the details, let me give a little bit of a trigger warning on this one because although I'm going to try to keep things less graphic, this part could still be upsetting to many who have lived through DV or SV. And I know that there are a lot of people who fit into that category who are also very much interested in this case. First, although she, as an expert witness, is given quite a bit of leeway to testify as to what she knows through hearsay, she also is supposed to testify as to opinions based on that hearsay, not just to testify the truth of the matters asserted in the hearsay statement itself. To put that a little more concretely, Dr. Hughes shouldn't just be rattling off a bunch of accusations made by Amber about Johnny as if there's truth to those accusations. She based her testimony almost entirely on what Amber told her, as if Amber is some credible witness right now. The problem for her is she's not. We've seen some damning evidence on Amber so far, so I would think that the jury really has no reason to find Amber a credible singular basis from which the expert can reliably draw her opinion. But despite that, Dr. Hughes testified that Johnny did all kinds of grotesque things to Amber, including forced intimate relations, threats to unalive her, body cavity searches, forced penetrations of all kinds, and more. All of this was highly prejudicial, and the way she characterized it was as if she had personal knowledge about the truth of these accusations. And the same thing goes for her testimony about Johnny. She testified that she never examined Johnny and yet was able to form opinions about him and his character. And what's more, she also testified that it was her professional opinion that Johnny abused Amber. This is so improper because whether or not Johnny abused Amber is a legal conclusion that is up for the jury to determine, not for a witness, not even an expert witness to testify to, and certainly not one that has been proffered as an expert merely in psychology. Now, on direct examination, this seemed like it could be very damning against Johnny to the jury because she made a lot of strong accusations and strong conclusions. However, as damning as it may sound in the moment, my prediction is that this will become an example of the danger of what happens when an expert witness tries to overplay his or her hand. In other words, I predict that on cross-examination, the Depp legal team is going to tear this witness to shreds because she makes some very big opinions, which are based on some very thin foundation. And that's because she's made some very broad conclusions about Amber and Johnny and their relationship. And those conclusions are based exclusively on meetings with Amber and witness statements by Amber's mother and friends and others who are friendliest to her case. Now, a few days ago, when we first heard that Amber was scheduled to testify first in her case in chief, the lawyers on our panel recommended against that because of how powerful Dr. Curry's testimony was in framing the jury's perception of Amber through her diagnoses of borderline personality disorder and histrionic personality disorder. In fact, we recommended that an expert witness go before her in order to reframe that platform that Amber would then step out onto for the jury to understand her. So when we heard that the Heard legal team was doing just that, it actually seemed intriguing. But the problem is, this is not the kind of expert testimony that we were thinking of that would be helpful to Amber in going first. And really, the reason for that is there's been no effort to try to build up some form of objective credibility of lay testimony before this point upon which she can base her expert opinion. All we really know is this expert looked at what Amber told her and believed her. Given how many times this jury has heard, Amber told me, and Amber told so and so X, it has diverged from many different witnesses on Johnny's side. By doing it this way, the Heard legal team has given the jury zero reason to trust this expert witness. In fact, to me, it almost makes me wonder if this is the best testimony that the Heard legal team has. And if that is the case, then it looks like we're about to see 2.5 more weeks of the Heard legal team producing witnesses testifying that they know what they know because Amber told me X. And if that's the way that things turn out, this makes me think that the Depp legal team really should organize their closing argument around the idea that the Heard legal team is basically telling the jury, don't believe Johnny, believe what Amber says. Don't believe Isaac Baruch, believe what Amber says. Don't believe the LAPD, believe what Amber says. Don't believe your own eyes, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, believe what Amber says. If they were to use a theme along these kinds of lines, it would drive home the idea that in the same way that Amber tried gaslighting Johnny throughout their relationship, now she's trying to also gaslight the jury. And to top it all off, if I were crafting a closing argument along these lines, I would probably want it to end with the recording of Amber saying, "Tell the world, Johnny, see if a jury believes you." I know that I'm getting a little bit fired up here, but this really does fire me up for what kind of a case that Amber might have or might not have, and really how much stronger Johnny's case might look at the end of tomorrow after cross-examination. So with that, I am really, really, really looking forward to the cross-examination of this expert witness to see what kind of a tone it sets for Amber's whole case in chief. My prediction, it's going to be a disco bloodbath. But did you see today's testimony? If so, let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. Otherwise, I hope you found this interesting or at least informative. And if you did, I would love it if you could hit the like button. It does help us with the YouTube algorithm gods. And if you haven't done so already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you can find out when the next video is uploaded and so you can join us in the next installment of this trial for day 14 of the Johnny Depp versus Amber Heard defamation trial right here on this channel. See you in the next video.